All right, so welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're going to really dig into something that's been a big deal in the tennis world lately, the whole Jannik Sinner doping case.
Right.
I know you want to get a clear picture of how this all unfolded, why it's gotten everyone so riled up,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
also what this might mean for the future of the sport. So, I guess to just set the scene really quickly for everyone, Jannik Sinner, the current world number 1, he tested positive for Clostebol,
Yeah.
and that's a banned steroid.
Right. And that's what makes this so interesting, right? It's not, a straightforward doping situation.
Oh, really?
It's not like he just, took something knowingly.
Right.
The International Tennis Integrity Agency, the ITIA, they did a whole investigation.
Yeah.
And they initially ruled that Sinner wasn't actually at fault.
Okay.
They think it was accidental contamination.
How does that even happen?
Well, apparently, Sinner's physiotherapist used this spray, right, and it contained Clostebol,
Hmm.
and then later treated Sinner, and they think that's how he ended up testing positive.
So basically, the ITIA is saying it was a genuine mistake.
Yeah, like an honest mistake.
But that didn't really settle things, did it?
Not at all.
Because, WADA stepped in.
Yeah, the World Anti-Doping Agency, they weren't happy with that ruling.
Okay.
So they went and appealed it to the Court of Arbitration for Sport. And they were actually pushing for a ban, like up to 2 years for Sinner.
Whoa, 2 years.
Yeah, and their reasoning is super important here.
Okay.
WADA, they didn't necessarily think that Sinner was intentionally, trying to cheat, trying to use the steroid.
Right.
But they were arguing that he's still ultimately responsible for what his team does.
Oh, wow. That's a pretty tough stance to take, especially if we're saying it was just an honest mistake.
Yeah, it's a really tricky situation, right? It kind of makes you ask, how far does an athlete's responsibility actually extend when it comes to their support team?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, think about it. These athletes have entire teams of people dedicated to their health and performance.
Exactly.
So where do we even begin to draw the line? Who's ultimately responsible?
Right. It's a really gray area.
So, I mean, what was Sinner's reaction to all of this going down?
Well, understandably, he denied knowingly taking anything banned.
Right.
And you can tell that this whole thing has really taken a toll on him mentally.
Yeah, I bet.
He even mentioned, after he won the Davis Cup, that this case was, constantly on his mind.
Yeah, that's got to be a huge weight to carry, especially when you're at the top of your game like he is.
Totally.
So, to try and avoid a longer suspension, I read that he ended up accepting a 3-month ban.
Yeah, which is a calculated risk when you think about it.
In what way?
Well, he's out for a good chunk of time, right?
Yeah.
Missing some really key tournaments, like the ATP 500 in Doha,
Oh, yeah.
the Masters 1000 events in Indian Wells, Miami,
Uh-huh.
Monte Carlo, even Madrid.
Yeah.
But it does mean that he can be back in time for the French Open.
Right, okay. But that's still a pretty big chunk of the season to miss.
For sure.
So how does all of this impact his ranking?
Well, he's going to lose 1,600 ranking points,
Ouch.
which is, a lot.
Yeah.
But he does have a decent lead at the top, a pretty comfortable lead. So unless guys like Zverev or Alcaraz have some insanely good runs, he should still be number 1 when he gets back.
Well, that's good, at least for Sinner and his fans. I'm sure they're relieved to hear that. But this whole thing has definitely caused a lot of debate, a lot of back and forth in the tennis world.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Haven't some players been pretty vocal about the whole thing?
Oh, totally. I mean, Nick Kyrgios, he went off on social media.
Here?
Yeah, he was really critical of how things turned out, questioning how fair it was, expressing his disappointment.
Well, Kyrgios is never one to shy away from speaking his mind, is he?
Definitely not.
So, I mean, do you think his reaction, is it just him, or does it kind of reflect a wider sentiment among players?
I think it does. I think this case really taps into this feeling that's been around for a while, like this sense that rulings aren't always consistent,
Yeah.
and that makes people question the fairness and transparency of the whole system.
It's interesting you say that because I remember earlier, Novak Djokovic, he was saying something about, how tennis rulings lacked consistency.
Right, yeah,
And this whole case doesn't really help with that perception, does it?
not at all. And it's not just individual players that are speaking out. The PTPA,
The Professional Tennis Players Association.
yeah, the one that Djokovic co-founded, they put out a really strong statement criticizing the lack of transparency and consistency, specifically in the way tennis handles these kinds of situations.
Wow. It sounds like there are a lot of strong feelings about all of this.
Yeah, definitely. And they're coming from all different sides. On one side, you've got, Kyrgios, the PTPA,
Yeah.
who are really questioning the fairness and transparency of the whole system. But then you've also got people like Filippo Volandri,
Who's that?
the Italian Davis Cup captain.
Right.
And he's been completely supportive of Sinner,
Okay.
calling him an honest player and saying that any kind of disqualification would be a great injustice.
So we've got like completely different interpretations of what's actually fair in this situation. I feel like there are no easy answers here.
Yeah, it's complicated. It really is. This case, it's not just about whether Sinner intentionally doped or not, you know. It's making us really think about all these different perspectives on responsibility,
Right.
about accountability, and about how hard it is to make sure everyone's playing on a level field in professional sports.
It sounds like this whole situation has like so many layers.
Yeah, it really does.
All right, well, we've already covered a ton of ground. We've talked about the positive test, the ITIA's investigation,
Mhm.
WADA's appeal, and even what different players and organizations are saying about it all. So, what do you think we should dive into next?
You know, I think it would be good to really dig into some of the specific reactions and statements that have come out.
Okay.
Like, remember earlier you mentioned Stan Wawrinka?
Yeah.
His comments were really striking. He
Yeah.
said, I don't believe in a clean sport anymore.
Right.
Pretty huge statement coming from a guy who's won like 2 Grand Slams, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, what do you think's going on there? Is he just frustrated about this specific case, or is there something like deeper that he's reacting to?
I think it speaks to this feeling that's becoming more common among athletes, you know, like a sense of disillusionment.
Really?
Yeah, they see these cases where like accidental contamination is a factor.
Right.
And it kind of makes them wonder if it's even possible to, like navigate all these anti-doping rules without messing up,
Right.
even if you're not trying to cheat.
Yeah, yeah. Because the rules are so stuck, right?
Yeah.
And the consequences are so
Yeah,
serious
they say.
that even an honest mistake can just like completely ruin your career.
Totally. And especially in a sport like tennis, right, where it's really down to the individual athlete, like what goes into their body.
Right.
That kind of pressure, that fear, it's going to be really tough to deal with.
Yeah, I bet. I can totally see why Wawrinka would feel that way. And I'm sure a lot of other players can relate to that sentiment.
Yeah,
It kind of makes you question, like, how effective is the current system?
right.
If EVA clean athletes are feeling like, they could get punished for something they didn't do.
Exactly. If a top player like Wawrinka is having these doubts, it makes you think maybe we need to look at the rules again, make them clearer, more transparent.
Yeah, yeah. And we talked about that earlier, right? Like how rulings haven't always been consistent.
Right.
And that seems to be a big part of the problem here.
Yeah, for sure. If players don't trust that the rules are going to be applied fairly to everyone,
Yeah.
it undermines the whole system.
Totally. Like, if we're thinking about potential solutions, what could actually be done to make things more consistent?
Well, one thing we could do is like set up some clearer guidelines, for these cases that involve accidental contamination,
Okay.
like maybe a more standardized way to evaluate the evidence, figure out who's responsible, and decide on the penalties.
Right. So everyone's on the same page.
Exactly.
And I think maybe we also need to focus more on education.
Yeah, for sure.
Like, not just for the athletes, but for their teams, too.
Right.
Everyone needs to be completely up to date on the rules because if there's a communication breakdown, like it sounds like there might have been in Sinner's case, the consequences can be huge.
Totally. I think education's really key here, and not just about memorizing a list of banned substances, but actually creating a culture of awareness and responsibility,
Right.
where everyone understands why these anti-doping measures are important and take steps to make sure they're following the rules.
Yeah, so it's like a proactive approach.
Exactly.
Well, it sounds like there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah.
But it's good that these conversations are happening. Well, I mean, do you think this whole Sinner case, could it actually lead to some real change in how we handle anti-doping in tennis, maybe even in other pro sports?
It could, yeah. It's definitely gotten people talking and debating, which is a good first step.
Yeah.
And the fact that, you've got organizations like the PTPA really taking a stand,
Right.
it shows that people want to see things improve.
It would be great if this whole situation actually led to some positive changes, that helped the athletes and made sure the sport stays fair.
Totally agree. And well, obviously right now, everyone's focused on Sinner and what happens to him. I think in the long run, the impact of this case is going to be much bigger than just this one situation.
I hope so. Now, we've talked a lot about the reactions from players and organizations, but what about the fans?
Yeah.
Like, how's the tennis community as a whole responding to all this?
It's been pretty mixed, to be honest. You've got some fans who are totally on Sinner's side.
Yeah.
They believe he's innocent. They see him as a victim of circumstance, a young player who made a mistake and is being punished too harshly.
Right, right.
But then you have others who are more skeptical.
Yeah.
They're wondering if maybe there's more to the story than we know.
Right. There's always that possibility.
Yeah, and it's hard to blame them for feeling that way.
Yeah.
Because, they want to believe in the players they admire, but they also want to see a fair and clean sport.
It's like when something like this happens, it's almost like a betrayal of trust.
Hmm.
Because if fans can't be sure that everyone's competing on a level playing field,
Yeah.
it kind of takes away from the excitement, the drama of the sport.
For sure. Trust is like the foundation of any sport. And cases like this, whether Sinner's ultimately found guilty or not, they can damage that trust.
So it sounds like this case is bringing up more questions than it's answering.
It really is.
It's making us think about all these complicated issues like, how do anti-doping rules actually work? What are the responsibilities of athletes and their teams? And how do we make sure pro sports are fair and trustworthy?
Hmm.